My name is Claire Donovan, and 6 months ago, I thought I had landed the kind of job you only dream about. I had worked my way through grad school, survived more unpaid internships than I care to admit, and finally signed a contract with one of the nation's top environmental research labs. We were working on cutting-edge enzyme technology that could heal soil poisoned by decades of industrial abuse, the sort of breakthrough that could change entire ecosystems. It was the kind of work my younger self had imagined when she stayed up late studying chemistry instead of going to parties. I believed in it with everything I had. That Friday started like any other, except our director, Dr. Catherine Pierce, had arranged a team lunch to celebrate the latest round of promising test results. We crowded into the glass-walled conference room, a dozen scientists in mismatched chairs around a table, covered in cartons of takeout from the Thai place down the street. Someone was telling a story about a disastrous date, and another was laughing so hard they nearly spilled their iced tea. The room buzzed with weekend plans and inside jokes, the kind of easy camaraderie that comes from long hours and shared deadlines. I was halfway through unwrapping my sandwich when my phone lit up beside my water bottle. An unfamiliar number. I tapped the screen without thinking, expecting maybe a delivery notification or a wrong number. The message was short, almost absurdly so. "Leave the building now, don't tell anyone." My eyes flicked over the words twice, as if repetition would make them make sense. My pulse quickened, a faint thrum in my ears. I looked up automatically, but no one was paying attention to me. To my right, Evan from data analysis was mid-punchline, and 2 seats over, Melissa was showing off photos of her new puppy. I told myself it was some kind of prank, maybe a friend messing with me. But something about the starkness of it, the lack of punctuation beyond that final period, made my skin prickle. I slid the phone under the table and read it again. There was no follow-up, no explanation. The screen reflected the fluorescent light above, almost blinding in its insistence. My fingers felt heavy against the smooth plastic as I debated what to do. I could ask if anyone else had gotten a weird text, but that would break the instructions. And there was that instruction, clear and unambiguous. Don't tell anyone. Dr. Pierce stood near the door, leaning casually against the frame, smiling at something someone said. Her presence was magnetic, always was, but now it felt suffocating. She had insisted we all attend this lunch, even moved a major meeting to make it happen. It seemed strange at the time, but I hadn't questioned it. I watched her for a moment, her eyes scanning the room with the subtle precision of someone who misses nothing. I forced myself to smile, made a vague comment about needing some fresh air, and stood. My legs felt both too light and too heavy, as if I were wading through water. The conversations continued without pause, no one stopping me. I walked past Dr. Pierce without making eye contact, sensing her gaze follow me even as she kept up her small talk. The hallway outside was quiet, almost unnervingly, so the hum of the air conditioning suddenly louder than I remembered. My phone stayed in my pocket, the message burning a hole in my thoughts. I didn't know if I was being ridiculous or saving my own life. Still, I kept moving toward the elevator, counting each step to keep my breathing steady. As the doors slid closed, I caught sight of the conference room one last time through the glass wall. Dr. Pierce had stepped to the window, her eyes locking on mine across the distance. Her smile was gone. In its place was something unreadable, a sharp focus that sent a shiver down my spine. That was the moment I knew the message wasn't a joke. And whatever was about to happen, I didn't want to be in that room when it did. 24 hours before that lunch, I was in my office, surrounded by the steady hum of lab equipment. The air always carried a faint tang of ethanol and soil samples, a smell that had become strangely comforting. I had been working through a backlog of reports when a mislabeled folder in the shared drive caught my attention. It was buried deep under unrelated project files, the kind of place no one would look unless they were searching for something specific. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside were spreadsheets full of transfer records, dates, and amounts. At first, I assumed it was a standard vendor payment log, but the numbers didn't make sense. Millions of dollars moved every quarter to shell corporations in countries that had nothing to do with environmental science. The line items marked safety compliance were conspicuously empty. It was as if money meant for safety testing had been siphoned elsewhere entirely. I scrolled through page after page, feeling a knot form in my stomach. None of this was part of my division's budget, but the dates aligned with our biggest breakthroughs. That meant someone had deliberately hidden these transactions, and whoever did it had access to the highest levels of our organization. The implications settled in slowly, like the way a chemical spill seeps into the ground, silent but dangerous. The sound of heels on polished concrete pulled me out of my thoughts. Dr. Catherine Pierce appeared in the doorway, her white lab coat draped casually over a tailored dress. She asked how the latest enzyme trials were progressing, her tone light and encouraging. I told her they were stable, that our latest strain showed promise in detoxifying soil faster than we'd modeled. She smiled, the kind of smile that made you feel seen, but in that moment, it felt like she was also measuring me. As she left, I minimized the financial records, suddenly aware of how incriminating they would look to the wrong person. My pulse was still uneven, and my mind replayed the numbers I had just seen. I told myself I needed more proof before jumping to conclusions. Still, a seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how hard I tried to focus on my work, it kept pushing its way to the surface. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, each floor ticking by with a metallic sigh. When the doors opened to the lobby, I stepped out and froze. Near the main glass entrance, 3 men in black tactical gear stood with earpieces scanning the crowd. They weren't security guards from our building. Their posture was sharper, their eyes alert and searching. Something told me they weren't here for a casual visit. I angled toward the side hallway, keeping my pace steady even though my chest was tightening. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Another message from the same unknown number. Blue cap. 10 minutes. West corner of Lincoln Park. I didn't stop walking, but my mind was racing. Whoever was sending these texts seemed to know exactly where I was and what I needed to do next. Pushing through the side exit, I slipped into the midday sunlight and merged with a small group leaving for lunch. I could feel the adrenaline making my steps light, almost too fast, so I forced myself to slow down. At the next block, I ducked into a convenience store. In the narrow aisle between laundry detergent and paper towels, I grabbed a baseball cap from the rack, pulling it low over my face. At the counter, I added a prepaid phone to my purchase. My hands felt too warm as I handed over cash, the plastic packaging crinkling in my grip. Outside, I switched sidewalks twice and cut through an alley that smelled faintly of oil and damp cardboard. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I expected to see one of those men from the lobby. By the time I reached the edge of Lincoln Park, my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I stayed among the trees, scanning the west corner for anyone who might be wearing a blue cap. My mind was split between the relief of being out of the building and the creeping dread of what I had just walked into. I didn't know who I could trust, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going back. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and buttered toast, the kind of place where conversations blended into the steady clink of plates. I spotted her in the back booth, a navy hoodie pulled over short, dark hair, the bill of a blue cap casting her face in shadow. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, like she'd been watching me long before I arrived. I slid into the booth across from her, my hands still wrapped around the baseball cap I'd bought earlier. She didn't waste time with small talk. She told me her name was Thea, and that she had worked with Ellis Ward, the scientist who held my job before me. The name alone sent a ripple through my chest. Ellis had been a quiet legend in the lab, but his sudden disappearance was explained away as burnout and early retirement. Now Thea was telling me he hadn't left willingly. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. The enzyme project wasn't what I thought. The strain I'd been refining was engineered not just to detoxify soil, but to destroy it, stripping it of fertility, while spreading through water systems. Worse, it could adapt to resist neutralization, turning into a self-sustaining weapon. My mind raced, trying to process her words against everything I'd believed about our mission. I thought about the rows of petri dishes glowing under UV light, the excitement in our meetings when data showed accelerated results. All of it reframed now as steps towards something catastrophic. Thea's eyes didn't waver as she told me this had already been tested overseas, leaving communities with poisoned fields and contaminated wells. I felt my throat tighten, a cold weight settling in my chest. I wanted to argue to demand proof, but deep down, I knew the signs had been there. The hidden financial transfers, the sudden rush to production, the way Pierce's smile never quite reached her eyes. Sitting in that booth with the smell of coffee and grease wrapping around us, I realized the work I had devoted myself to wasn't saving the world at all. It was building a weapon, and my hands were all over it. Thea slid a set of car keys across the table, telling me there was a safe house 2 hours north. She said it was stocked with supplies and a secure line where we could plan our next move. Her voice was calm, but her eyes kept flicking to the window, tracking every passerby. I took the keys, telling myself I didn't have much choice, even as unease settled in my stomach. The roads out of the city were quiet, the headlights carving narrow tunnels through the darkening countryside. I tried to focus on the directions she had scribbled on a napkin, but a faint, blinking light on the passenger side floor caught my attention. Leaning down, I saw it wedged beneath the seat, a small black device with an antenna no bigger than my thumb. My breath hitched. A tracker. I gripped the wheel tighter, my mind running in frantic loops. If Thea knew about this, it meant she had set me up. If she didn't, it meant someone had already anticipated her plan. Either way, I couldn't keep driving. I pulled onto a gravel shoulder, cut the engine, and grabbed my bag. The cool night air hit my face as I slipped into the tree line, my shoes crunching against dry leaves. Minutes later, the low rumble of an engine grew louder on the road behind me. Through the branches, I saw beams of light sweep across the shoulder where I had stopped. Dark figures stepped out, one holding a device that pulsed red as it scanned the ground. They were following the tracker's signal. My heart pounded in my ears as I crouched lower, trying to make my breaths silent. The forest thickened, shadows folding in around me. I moved deeper, ignoring the sting of branches against my skin. Somewhere behind, a voice called out, and another beam of light sliced through the dark, searching. I kept going until the sounds faded and only the rustle of leaves remained. When I finally stopped, the night was so still, it felt unnatural. I didn't know where I was or whom to trust anymore. All I knew was that I had to keep moving. The cottage sat on a rise above the shore, its paint peeling from years of salt and wind. I stepped inside and was met with the faint smell of dust and seawater, as if the place had been closed up for months. The living room was sparse, but on the small table by the window sat a laptop, its lid half open like it had been waiting for me. I powered it on and a video file was already queued. The screen flickered, revealing Ellis Ward's face. He looked older than the photo in the lab archives, his eyes sunken and his voice rough. He spoke quickly, explaining that the enzyme project had been weaponized and was being sold to multiple governments under covert contracts. Then his tone shifted, and he described human trials carried out inside our own lab, using staff as unwitting subjects. My stomach twisted as images flashed, people I knew, their names and faces, now tangled in something I couldn't unsee. When the video ended, the silence in the room pressed in on me. I sat there for a moment, staring at the frozen frame of Ellis's face. The scope of it was staggering, a web of corruption stretching far beyond anything I had imagined. I felt cold, not from the ocean air, but from the realization that I was part of this machine, even if unknowingly. A movement outside caught my attention. Through the salt-streaked glass, I saw Thea standing near the fence line, her hands buried in the pockets of her jacket. She looked toward the house for only a second before turning away and heading back down the path toward the road. I couldn't tell if she had been watching over me or making sure I didn't leave. That uncertainty was almost as unsettling as what I had just seen on the screen. My phone vibrated on the table beside the still glowing laptop. The message was from Thea, short and urgent. "The house is compromised. 30 minutes, lighthouse." My pulse kicked hard, the words pulling me upright before I even realized I was moving. The quiet of the cottage suddenly felt unsafe, every creak in the floorboards like a signal that someone was already here. I stood at the door, staring at the tree line beyond the road. If I slipped into the woods, I could disappear for days, maybe long enough to figure out my next move. But the other option, meeting Thea, could mean answers, or it could mean walking into a trap I wouldn't escape from. My mind ran through every moment we'd shared, every hint that she might be playing both sides. I didn't know which version of her was real. The lighthouse was visible from the bluff, its white tower cutting against the darkening sky. I approached along the cliffs, keeping low and out of sight, until the harbor came into view. At the far end of the dock, Thea stood alone, her face turned toward the water. No sign of backup, no shadows waiting in the wings, just her and the wind tugging at her jacket. I stayed hidden for another minute, watching her posture, the way she kept glancing toward the road like she was waiting for me. My chest tightened with the weight of the decision. Running meant isolation. Going meant trust. In the end, the pull for answers was stronger than fear. I stepped out from the cover of the rocks and began walking toward her, every step echoing in my ears. Thea drove us inland, winding through narrow back roads, until the trees gave way to an old warehouse by a river. Inside, the air buzzed with the sound of generators and quiet conversation. This was Sanctuary, a hidden lab where 17 scientists worked in defiance of the corporation's funding of the original enzyme project. They moved with purpose, their faces tired but steady, as if they had been living on borrowed time for years. Ellis Ward stepped out from behind a bank of monitors, his presence grounding the chaos. He looked exactly like he had in the video, only more worn, as though the weight of what he knew had been pressing on him every day since. He wasted no time explaining that the enzyme wasn't only a soil killer, it also caused permanent infertility and neurological damage in exposed populations. Trials overseas had already left villages uninhabitable, and Pierce's upcoming demonstration would take it global. The room seemed to tighten around me as he spoke. The scientists had been working on a neutralizing compound, but it needed final testing before it could be deployed. The plan was simple in outline, but dangerous in execution. Crash Pierce's event, infiltrate the dispersal system, and release the neutralizer before the enzyme hit the air. My pulse quickened, but for the first time in days I felt a direction forming. I understood then that this wasn't just about survival anymore. If we failed, the damage would be irreversible, and every hour brought us closer to that point of no return. Looking around the room at the people who had risked everything to get this far, I knew I couldn't walk away. This was our one chance, and I was in it all the way. We moved under the cover of darkness, the event hall glowing ahead like a beacon. The team split at the perimeter. One group headed for the ventilation units that would carry the enzyme mist. My job was with the second team, getting to the storage area where the drums of the compound waited. Every step felt timed against a countdown I couldn't see but could feel in my bones. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of machinery and the low murmur of guests gathering for Pierce's demonstration. I slipped past a security checkpoint with Thea's distraction, drawing the guard's eyes away. In the prep room, I found the drum marked with the same batch number as the lab reports. My hands shook as I connected the hose from our neutralizer tank and watched the liquid swirl into the mixture. Before I could leave, Pierce appeared in the doorway, her eyes sharp and calculating. She asked why I was there, her tone low but laced with threat. I kept my voice steady, drawing her into conversation, pressing her to brag about the reach of her work. The recorder in my pocket caught every word as she described contracts, test sites, and the inevitability of her product spreading. When she stepped closer, I triggered the signal to the first team. A sharp crack echoed through the building as the dispersal system went offline. Guests stirred in confusion, and Pierce turned toward the sound. I slipped past her, uploading the recording and the files Ellis had given me to a secured drop that fed directly to media outlets and international watchdogs. By the time alarms blared and security flooded the hall, the neutralizer was already in place, and the evidence was out in the world. Pierce's voice, her own words, would be the weapon that undid her. As we slipped out into the night, the distant wail of sirens told me it was over. Not safe yet, but over. Within a week, Pierce was in federal custody, her image flashing across every news channel alongside the damning recordings. The company collapsed under the weight of international investigations, its assets frozen, and contracts terminated. Scientists who had once been trapped inside its walls were released from non-disclosure agreements, free to tell the truth about what had been happening. I watched from a distance as the neutralizer worked exactly as planned, reclaiming contaminated soil and halting the enzyme's spread. Former colleagues reached out, some in shock, others in gratitude as they realized what they had narrowly escaped. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders unclench, like I could finally take a full breath without fear of what might come next. The offers came quietly at first, then more openly. Universities' research foundations and environmental coalitions wanted me to lead new projects, ones dedicated to restoration instead of destruction. I accepted a role with a small independent lab committed to healing the very kind of damage we had stopped. The work was slower, harder in some ways, but it was honest, and it mattered. Looking back, I know everything could have gone differently if I had ignored that first text. The risks were real, the cost high, but the alternative was letting silence win. Sometimes the choice to stand up feels small in the moment, almost invisible, until you see the waves it sends out into the world. I learned that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet act of walking toward the truth when every instinct tells you to run. And in the end, one decision, one voice can be enough to turn the tide.